Alright guys, we are going to move into the strand making process for the chandelier project. So we already looked at how to iron the wax paper, and you can see the wax paper is going to create these strands, obviously. For the chandelier, you're going to have 3 different sizes of strands. With the very inner layer, the very center layer, is going to be 5 rectangles long. So you can see there's 5 here. The middle layer is going to be 4, and then the outer layer, which is the layer that is most visible to everybody, is going to be 3 long, and that's where you get that stepped look. So I'm going to show you how to make those strands. I already showed you how to make the paper through the ironing process. We already took a look at that. And hopefully you can see, now that this paper has cooled, it's pretty firm, so it is still flexible, but at the same time it's pretty firm. And you can see these nice veins going through, so like here's a nice vein that's running through, and just all of these bubbles. It's the perfect texture that you're looking for when you're working on this project. Now, something that I found to be really helpful for cutting the strands is a straight edge cutter. I actually have had this straight edge cutter since I was in high school, so this is the one that I used. So I'm not really sure if they even still make this guy. It is, if you can see that, it's a Falcon brand, and it pretty much just opens up and you've got your ruler here and an edge to cut. So this is what I used for the process. Now I'm going to be working backwards here so that you can see what I'm doing with this straight edge cutter, so please forgive me, it's a little bit difficult to work backwards. But the first thing you want to do is cut off this crazy edge that we've got going on right here. So in the first portion of this tutorial, we mentioned that you want to get these edges here, the long edge, as straight as possible, and the reason you want to do that is because you're going to cut this off. So you want it to be as straight as possible so that when you cut this off, hopefully it's not too crooked when you're going to cut it off. So we're cutting off this psycho edge here. I'm going to flip it over and do the other side. And then what you want to do is now we want to straighten up this bottom edge and the top edge so that we have a nice clean edge all the way around. Now, because my straight edge cutter isn't long enough to cut this entire length of paper, I actually need to cut it in half. And I need to cut about right here. So we wind up with a square. And then with that square, I actually noticed that this portion on my straight edge cutter was exactly the width that I wanted it to be. So you can see all of the strands that I cut are this width here. And it made it a lot easier because I didn't have to measure that part. It was already measured for me. So all I had to do was line up the paper with that edge each time and cut a strand. So there you see what the strand is going to look like. Now I've already cut some strands, but that's the basic process for cutting the strands, and as you go through you're going to wind up with a whole bunch of strands here. Now once you have these strands, you need to cut them down into the little rectangles that you see in the chandelier. And the way I did that is I took this measuring portion here and I cut these 2.5 inches. I made each of the rectangles, this is about 1.5 inches thick, and then the length on this is going to be 2.5 inches long. Now to make the marks, I actually made a really handy dandy tool, and it's really high tech around here too. This is actually just a paper clip, and I just straightened it out so that I could scratch some marks. So 2.5, 5, 7.5, and 10. Now you might be wondering, why am I scratching the marks instead of just using a marker or a pencil to draw the marks? The reason I'm doing it this way is because if you put a mark on your strand, you better make sure that you cut it exactly right to where it removes that entire mark. Otherwise you're going to wind up with pencil marks showing, or I actually started by using blue marker and I wound up with blue marks on my strands of paper. So I wanted to just make sure that it was something that wouldn't show. So the scratch mark, even if you miss on that cut, it's going to blend right in with the rest of your piece and no one's ever going to know what it was even intended for. So then all you need to do to cut the square is again use your straight edge cutter and you have your square. Once you get a couple of those cut, you're going to wind up with a bunch of those. Now this was a portion I was talking about when I was ironing. If you ever do notice that something's loose, so right here we have a loose piece of wax paper. That's probably not going to turn out too well if I were to hang it on the strand. So what you can do, especially on these 4-ply pieces, just go ahead and just peel that off. And you still wind up with a piece of wax paper that is 3-ply thick. If you're working with one of the 3-ply and for some reason it's giving you that little bubble that's not sticking, I would just say toss the piece out. But for this, with it being a 4-ply, I would just peel off that 4th layer and then you're left with this 3-ply. And it's perfectly fine. It looks great for a piece to use on your chandelier. So that's basically the rectangle process. Then you can move into the fastening process, which starts with cutting a hole. Now I was donated this hole punch by my good friend Jennifer, and thank you so much, Jennifer. It made the project so much easier to have this. So if you don't have one of these, I would personally recommend going out and finding one like this where it's just a tiny hole punch. But there are other ways that you could punch the hole too. If you want to, you could use your high-tech tool that we made with your paper clip, or you could use a needle and thread and just kind of thread them all the way through. Lots of different ways that you could punch the hole, but I found this to be the easiest method. Now what you're going to do, for the very bottom piece, you only want to punch one hole up at the top. And the reason is because you're not going to be hanging anything from the bottom of it, so you don't want to punch that second hole. So there's the bottom piece. Now for the pieces going up the strand, you actually want to punch both sides. So you can even just line them up and punch, or you can do them one at a time. I almost recommend doing them one at a time because if you do mess up when you're working with both of them like this, you're not just ruining one piece, you're ruining multiple pieces. But the main thing here is you want a hole at the top and at the bottom on these strands so that you can start to link them together. So once you have all of these holes punched, what you're going to do is bring in the fasteners. Now you're going to find at Michael's, you're going to find a lot of different types of these fasteners. I'm going to put these up a bit closer. Hopefully you can see. This one here is actually an oval fastener, and this one here is actually a round fastener. Now in my chandelier project I actually used both of these. The reason was because I started with the oval ones and I basically bought out the store of these oval ones here. So I needed more, and so I went over to these round ones. Now there's pros and cons, I think, for both of them. I personally recommend the oval. So if you can find these oval ones, it's 144 count. So I would recommend these, and the reason I would recommend these is because they are softer, they're easier to bend, you can actually use your hands to open and close them. Whereas these ones, the round ones, are more firm, so you really need a good set of needle nose pliers in order to get them open and then shut again. Now, for the strand itself, it's not too big of a deal to be using those pliers, but when you're trying to attach them up onto the frame of the chandelier, having to get these out is really a pain, and it can really slow you down. So that's, again, why I would recommend these oval ones, because you can just do it all by hand. But once you have everything hooked up, you're going to wind up with these strands, and again, you're going to just attach this to the frame with the hooks that you have glued on with your hot glue gun. So hopefully that helped. If you do run into any other questions, or if anything still isn't clear, please shoot me an email. I always appreciate hearing from you guys, but otherwise be looking for more information to come on the frame building process. Thanks.